Welcome to Godsplaining, Contemplative Preachers, Contemporary Age. Each week, join the Dominican friars as they consider all things Catholic.
Welcome to Godsplaining. This is Father Jacob Bertrand Janczyk. Today, I'm here with our very own Father Patrick Briscoe. Father Patrick, how are you?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for inviting me on the show today. That was a really thoughtful offer. I mean, you do have your choice, right? You know, you could have invited, Father Bonaventure, Father Gregory, or Father Joseph Anthony, I guess. But, it's just a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, it's great. It's so great that you were able to join us here on our little podcast. So, how are things? You were just in New York, weren't you?
Yeah, I had a great retreat this past weekend with a bunch of students from NYU, from Worcester Polytechnic, and from Quinnipiac. It was sort of a regional New England retreat for college students. I just did it again. I keep referring to this Long Island-based retreat as New England, which is really embarrassing because we're definitely at Immaculate Conception Seminary on Long Island in Huntington, New York, which is, as Father Jacob Bertrand would swiftly correct me, not New England.
That's true. It's not. But that's all right. Closer to New England than DC or from Indiana or wherever you're from. So New England enough. So that's cool. Yeah. Well, good. So this episode, we're not talking about New England or retreats that Father Patrick has recently preached, but we're going to try something new, I guess. At least new for Father Patrick and myself. I know we haven't done an episode on a film episode together. I know we haven't done that, and I'm quite sure we haven't done one either on our own. That's kind of been Father Gregory and Father Bonaventure's wheelhouse, but we're going to take over and we're going to do an episode on a movie that we both watched on it's not really public transportation, right? Public transportation is like a city bus or like a metro, but on transportation, I was on an airplane, Father Patrick was on a train, which made it a little not awkward, but it's kind of an emotional roller coaster of a movie. So it's hard to watch those. It's like watching a comedy on like a plane or something. You can't really laugh out loud, type thing. Yeah. So anyways, we thought we'd talk about a relatively new movie, a movie that came out in 2018 called Beautiful Boy, which stars Steve Carell from The Office and Timothée Chalamet. So it came out in 2018. So I'll, I guess, set the scene a little bit. It was directed by Felix van Groningen. His first, I don't know much about him, so like me saying this doesn't make me like a Felix van Groningen guru, but his first English film, titled after John Lennon's song "Beautiful Boy," which we'll talk about music in a little bit in the movie. But the title comes from this song "Beautiful Boy" that John Lennon wrote and sang, and Steve Carell sings. His character sings this kind of as a lullaby in the movie. But the film, it's interesting because it's based on two real people played by Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet. It's based on the memoirs of a father and a son. Father being David Sheff, that is the character's name, but also the real person's name, and Nick Sheff is the son. And it documents or recounts Nick Sheff's drug addiction that he falls into as like an 18-year-old, late teen, kind of end of high school. And the relationship between David and Nick's, fall into drug addiction, and David's trying to help his son. It's based on the true story of these two and their memoirs that they wrote. So David's book, the memoir that he wrote about his son and their relationship, is entitled Beautiful Boy, and then subtitled A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction. And Nick's autobiography memoir is entitled Tweaked, Growing Up on Methamphetamines. So kind of sets the scene a little bit. What do you think? Is that enough? Do you have more to say on that?
Yeah,
Father Patrick?
That's all the important stuff. I mean, I have to confess, I was a little bit hesitant to watch the film because I'm such a fan of The Office. And it was tough for me to consider Michael Scott, playing a serious role, right? Because Steve Carell is like, so in my mind, that's all I see. I see this man and I see the character Michael Scott. And so I thought that I wouldn't be able to get over that. But that's not the case. And at one point, you made a good point, Father Jacob Bertrand, when we were talking about the film. You said that it's kind of like watching John Krasinski in A Quiet Place. that these actors are actually really, really talented, and they can portray roles that are much richer than just their comedic roles in The Office. So don't be afraid. You know, if you had hesitations about watching the film because you didn't know whether or not you'd like Steve Carell in this role, be at peace, because he's really fantastic. And that goes away. You stop thinking about Michael Scott and Steve Carell kind of instantly, because his character is so profound, and you just get caught up in the story of this man and his son's life so quickly.
Yeah, and two, I think in thinking about like the John Krasinski, Steve Carell, Jim, Michael Scott kind of thing from The Office, the characters in The Office too are so kind of caricatures of themselves, you know, like in that way. And it's just like in those movies, A Quiet Place, which we're not talking about, but this one with Steve Carell here, you're spot on that. It's not sort of like, oh, this is Michael Scott trying to be a dad. You know, it's a whole different vibe, which is really cool. So yeah, that sets the scene, I guess. That's, and the little sort of encouragement from Father Patrick. So there you have it. Okay, so let's talk before. I think we want to spend a lot of our time teasing out some of the themes and things from the movie, but a couple like kind of unique features about the film, perhaps that I noticed, that Father Patrick noticed, and two, at least that stand out. Two of them kind of go together. The way the movie, when you look at the way in which Groningen directs the movie and sets the movie, and the way by which the movie transpires, there's a linearity to the story. Right, in the sense that there's a story being told, but the story is
that
also
a word, linearity?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't let that slide. All right, anyway,
like
so
pretty
the
sure
story is linear.
Linearity, linear, whatever. There's a linearity I'm sticking to it, to the story. But Groningen does a sort of masterful job of showing the relationship through a series of flashbacks. So the movie is not like a kind of flashback movie. It kind of is in some ways, but it also isn't. So he relies on flashbacks, but it's not a movie solely about the past, right? The past kind of informs the present in ways that like the past does. So I thought that was really cool. And the way the cinematography and the music is used, kind of the way he uses these beautiful scenes and light and these kind of things, which you usually don't associate with like movies about drugs and addiction and kind of like life crises. But like just the cinematography, the photography is really beautiful. And then the music is really cool too. I know that you really like the soundtrack through the movie too, Father Patrick, right?
Yeah, the soundtrack was really amazing. And in fact, the title track, Beautiful Boy, which, as you said, is the great John Lennon song. And when I heard that, I went immediately to another great American film, Mr. Holland's Opus, because that song, Beautiful Boy, plays such an important role in that film, which again is about a kind of conflicted father-son relationship, right? Mr. Holland, the music teacher, who ends up having a son who's deaf, but is still a great depiction of a kind of sharing in life, trying to get to what a father and son can share. So that's got that great theme of Mr. Holland's Opus, right? Trying to make music come alive for his deaf son, and his deaf son trying to understand what his life is as a music teacher. So that song is pregnant with meaning for me. Was pregnant for meaning for me already because of that film. So to see it used in such a profound way in this film, I really enjoyed. But it was you who told me, and I was really surprised to hear this, that the songs from the soundtrack are actually taken from these memoirs. So not only are they just profound and put together in such an amazing way in the film, like it's actually just a great standalone soundtrack, but it's actually drawn from the real lives of these two men, right?
Yeah, they talked about, there was this interview that I watched, I guess it was, I know it was, I don't know why I'm like playing coy. It was an interview on YouTube with Groningen, the director, and then Carell and Chalamet just before the debut. I watched it after seeing the movie a little bit ago, but it was the interview originally aired just before the release of the movie, so sometime in 2018. And in it, they mentioned using the memoirs as really the way by which to understand the characters that they were playing. but also that like the music, whether it was actual songs mentioned or like, artists or those kind of things, but it adds a different dimension or a further dimension to what the film is, and that it's not just the sort of like plaything of a director or of like a screenwriter, but actually really draws on the real lives of the people that Carell and Chalamet are portraying, which I thought was really just a really cool and neat little, I don't know, tidbit. I don't know if I call it a tidbit, but it's cool anyways. So yeah, I guess in thinking about the movie as a whole, the way by which Groningen uses the music. One of the other things that he said in the interview too was this idea that like the linearity is a word, for the record. I looked it up, but the way by which like music kind of sets each kind of scene, kind of not like a MTV music video, but kind of like using music to like tell part of the story, and it's just really cool, I thought. So, anywho, great. So let's talk about some of the themes here, and at least for I think the first thing, kind of a foundational thing that Groningen as the director brings out in a lot of ways throughout. And I know that as well, we'll talk about a couple other big themes that give reason or factors that contribute to Nick's addiction, to his drug addiction in the movie. And one of the things though that the director was pretty clear about refraining from was giving a sort of like one-to-one kind of relational cause and effect to Nick's addiction. Essentially, Nick seems to grow up in a pretty stable home with a father and a stepmother and younger siblings, but also a relationship with his biological mother that seems to be pretty solid. You can't. There's not a sort of like. There's no clear reason as to like this happened in Nick's life, so he's using drugs to cope. Now we can talk about factors, and we will through different themes, but there isn't a sort of like parents were bad, or there's just this addiction, or there's this traumatic event, and that leads to two things, I think, very quickly. One, the kind of reality of people's lives, and that we often things aren't black and white, but also kind of the sort of intricacies of the relationships and the themes that come out there. So I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of hold back a little bit of the cause, but dive into the factors, the contributing realities, but withhold a sort of cause in itself. So I thought that was an interesting kind of human reality, human kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not reductive. The film is not a morality tale, and that's part of why it's so powerful, is that you really get caught up in these experiences, which is one of the major points of the film, right? Is that it's a father trying to experience everything his son's experiencing. And so on a meta level, the film does that, is it brings you into this not search for understanding, but somehow that doesn't really even get at what's going on. But I think that's a great frame, a great fundamental feature of how the film is structured, and how that points to, as you're saying, the really delicate and rich way that it treats this major question about what causes addiction and how does one get out of it.
Yeah, there's one of the things, and with this sort of like no clear reason as to like the cause of Nick's addiction or whatever it might be. I think the film does, through the acting and then through the directing and the screenplay and all of that, really does a good job in bringing forth a level of humanity into the conversation, rather than just using like characters to like the addiction in some ways. Now you might correct me on this, but in some ways the addiction doesn't almost matter, in the sense that like it's not the addiction that is the focus of the movie, but it's the people that are the focus of the movie. And obviously the drug addiction plays a huge role in those relationships and those kind of things, but it's really about diving into these David and Nick's lives rather than a sort of like exploration of addiction in itself.
That's right. And I think that's how it keeps the light quality, that you were referring to in terms of its cinematography and the overall feeling. It's a film about a heavy subject, but the film itself does not feel heavy. In that way, it's kind of like a Terrence Malick film where there are just kinds of idyllic glimpses into things. I'm thinking of A Hidden Life, right, where you just see this idyllic family life, this glimpse of this beautiful family life experienced in the countryside in this rural village. You get glimpses of that in this film, of a kind of moments of idyllic life that are interrupted then by the violence of this crisis of addiction.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's a good way to describe it. So, all right. Well, with that, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a handful of these themes more specifically that come out in the movie, and how through the film they're kind of brought to life. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
You are listening to Godsplaining. Visit us at godsplaining.org to listen to our episodes, shop our store, and donate to our podcast. All gifts go to improving the podcast and bringing the gospel to more listeners. Thanks for your support.
Welcome back to Godsplaining. This is Father Jacob Bertrand, and I'm here with Father Patrick on a new endeavor. It's so exciting. We're doing an episode, maybe not. Father Patrick rolled his eyes, so he's not as excited as I'm sure all of our listeners are. We're doing, the two of us at least, for talking about a film, which we haven't done before. We've talked about books and a host of other insane things that people care or don't care about. But today we're talking about the movie called Beautiful Boy, which stars Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet. And as we were talking about at the top of the episode, depicts using the memoirs from these two real persons, David and Nick Sheff, the addiction, drug addiction of Nick, and the way by which that affects the relationship and them as men, but also the relationship, the father-son relationship. So, Father Patrick, what is, I guess, something like one of the themes that kind of stood out for you in watching the movie?
Yeah, I think one of the most important questions to ask, right, is about Nick's identity. So we get a little clue from this in the rather brilliant use of one particular prop. So Nick, like his father, is a writer, and he's writing to explain himself. And at one point, when he goes missing, his father goes into his room and is kind of looking through his things. And off of Nick's desk, his father picks up a copy of Fitzgerald's Beautiful and the Damned. And that novel, written in the early 20th century, is essentially about, one way to summarize that novel is that it's about a group of people that can't get over their past. And part of the struggle that Nick has facing his own identity, part of the difficulty that he's facing, is that he can't get over his past mistakes. And he allows himself to be reduced to the sum of his failures, the sum of the times that he's given into his addiction. And he's not able to see the richness of his own identity as a son, as a member of this family. He's not able to see his talents, right? And there are a number of really profound moments, I think, that point this out, that show this in the film.
Yeah, one of them, I think, I know had you had sort of mentioned before too, was the moment when he was graduating and wanted to smoke marijuana. Right, that falls here, right? With how he's trying to like understand himself and that sort of thing.
Yep, that's right. And so he defends his drug use to his dad, right? He's just saying like, well, I need this because it takes the edge off of a stupid everyday reality. And so for Nick, there's this kind of there's this existential question. It's not kind of an existential question; it's an existential question. He's not able to bear the burden of life as it is. There's a real kind of suffering or a frustration about cultivating a sense as a writer. You know, his dad, his father is also a writer and encourages Nick in his writing. Nick gets into college. It takes him a bit to get to go, and then he goes and has more issues fighting his addiction there. But his father says, Nick, you're amazing. You applied to 6 colleges. Stop doubting yourself. But Nick has this difficulty embracing his identity with confidence that he's a writer, that he's good at it, and that would be enough to carry him through the day to day. So I think those 3 factors, right, are kind of the challenge of the past, this cultivation of his own gifts, the struggle with that, and his pursuit of things in the future. I think those are all wrapped up in this question about his own identity. This kind of, he's plagued by this self-doubt that comes through.
Yeah, and I guess with that, one of the things that stands out is that I guess I was kind of mentioning this before with the idea that there's not a sort of, well, you actually put it better than I, but like there's not a reductionist kind of reality to the presentation of the movie, that they're, not just saying X, Y, and Z, and that's it, and everything's black and white. There's really a delving into who Nick is and who David is. And part of the thing that stands out to me is that, Nick doesn't seem to have like a storied or a troubled past. Part of the thing you're asking is like,
that's a good
through
point.
the movie is like,
Yeah.
In some ways, and even David, the father, played by Carell, is asking like, where did it go wrong? What's wrong? Like, what's the source of the hurt and of the desire to avoid? And when he's looking, the scene that Father Patrick described, when Carell's character is looking through his son's journal, you hear the voiceover of Chalamet or Nick reading what Carell is seeing on the page, and part of it says he's written down that he does drugs. His addiction is there to fill the void of his life, but you look at his life and you're sort of like, well, what void? So it's not this isn't a sort of like judgment that, oh, you have a good life so you shouldn't have problems, but just raises the question of like, live even in relatively stable and good circumstances, like people are still people. And like, even to think of it in Christian terms, like the effect of like original sin and brokenness, it doesn't escape those who have seemingly idyllic or relatively idyllic kind of upbringings and those kind of things. So it's a kind of poignant theme throughout of like, gosh, what is going on here?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that leads into this really rich theme of the father trying to understand what the son is going through, right? So the film is, it's titled Beautiful Boy, and if I have to describe it, what is it fundamentally about? It's about a father trying to understand his son's suffering, his son's addiction, right? So the film opens with Carell, the father, saying, to a scientist, to a therapist, to a counselor, trying to say, what is he feeling? That's his first question. What is his son Nick feeling? And his second question is, how can I help him? How can I help him? So there's a time when Nick is in treatment and he runs away from the treatment center, and Carell, the father, says, well, is anyone looking for him? And he goes out in his car in the rain. It's a really powerful scene where he goes out as the father looking for his son. And so the film is caught up because it's a genuine cycle of addiction. It's not an easy heroic tale. There are triumphs, there are failures, and so you want each of these times where Nick, the son, gets lost. You want each of them to be a kind of homecoming, right? Like as you're watching it, you want the prodigal son moment to be there, and it comes sometimes actually as a point of fact, where the father welcomes Nick home. Where he says, where he's trying to coach him to come home. He wants to support his son as much as he can, to understand as much as he can what's possible. And there are all kinds of moments that are really powerful, where the father assures the son, where David assures Nick that he loves him. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they have this really touching code language that instead of saying "I love you," because he feels like that doesn't capture everything that he feels for his son. When his son's a little boy, and he's sending him on an airplane once, he says, "If you took all the words in the world and used them to try and tell you how much I love you, that would still come up short." And so eventually they just start exchanging this one word, everything. That this father loves his son so much that he gives him everything. And for the Christian, I mean, this is extraordinary, right? Because this puts us immediately in the world of the Father, God the Father's understanding of God the Son, of the Word, this kind of total knowledge, this total sharing, this language of everything. Which I think is so profound. But that love is really intense, right? And so there's one moment, Father Jacob Bertrand, that you raised that is really touching, where that love comes through in a really difficult way, right? Where David has to say,
Yeah.
that's it. This is all that I can give you.
Yeah, and that so part of the film he's calling Nick is calling his dad David to, there was an incident and he wants to go back home, and David, as the father, has realized that there's like his ability to help his son is kind of come to an end, and in ways he's enabling him, so as counseled by the therapist and these kind of things, is to not let Nick come home, like to send him back to rehab, back to his sponsor. So there's this moment, and I think it's the most kind of difficult moment, at least for me in the film, to watch, when Nick is just begging to come home. And David says, call your sponsor, go back to rehab, get the help you need. You can't come back here. It's not going to help you. And even in that moment, the call ends, but the call ends with David, Carell's character, telling Nick, his son, that he loves him. He says, "I love you." And Nick replies back, "I love you too." And it's this bond between father and son, despite kind of the brokenness of all that's going on, that kind of pierces through. And I think, as Father Patrick was saying, talking about like the Christian mind or the Christian heart, or just like the Christian who's watching this, you get a real sense of, like unfettered, I'm trying to think of a better word, but like unfettered love, like unrestrained love, but like that just like is unending despite the circumstances. So it's a really hard moment to watch in the film, but a really beautiful moment in the same kind of way. So stands out a lot to me. It's an interesting thing to watch. Yeah. This idea of identity comes through too, in kind of the quintessential, I guess it's quintessential because it's used in the trailer scene from the diner.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yep.
Yeah. It kind of brings out these prodigal kind of things again. So Nick has been missing for some time, and David finally gets him to agree to meet, and they meet at this diner, and David thinks that Nick is going to want to come home. This is before the scene from that I was just describing, but David thinks that Nick's going to come home, but Nick just wants money. And so as a father, he looks at him and he says, "Who are you, Nick? This is not you." And there's this real sort of, like, as Father Patrick was saying, this real desire for, on the father's part, to know his son, but even on the father's part, to have his son know himself, as a member of the family and as a son and as someone who's loved. And these, so that scene is really kind of impactful too in that way.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that you just feel so badly for them, again, as a Christian watching the film, right, is you just see this whole horizon of life that is not accessed, and it's not so simple as if we say, like, well, if Nick had just found Jesus, then his life would be great. I mean, Jesus would make his life better, right? But we don't want to be Pollyannish about what faith could do to him, but you feel a certain pain. It's like, oh, there's so much more that you could have at your disposal if you would access this religious dimension of your life, right? Like there's no sense of anything spiritual going on, and there's just this kind of woundedness because of that, right? Like at least I felt that Nick is really a seeker, right? He talks about needing to just fill this deep hole in him. I mean, he's looking for ultimate meaning, for greater purpose, and as a believer, at least when we have our sufferings, our struggles, we look at Christ on the cross and we see our Lord who shares them, right? I often use that line of Paul Claudel, who says Jesus didn't come to give our suffering meaning or to remove it. He came to fill it with his presence. At least the believer can find the Lord in their suffering. Our suffering is not empty because the Lord is there with us, but for Nick, you find him in this crisis of emptiness, of alienation, of isolation. And another moment that comes out in a really strong way is a moment where he breaks into the family home, when he goes to his home when his parents are not there, his father and his stepmother and his stepbrother and stepsister, when they're not there, and you feel a kind of violence of him trying to take something that could be his, but his father's not there to give it, and you just feel how alienated he is from what could be his, the richness, the fullness of life that could be his.
Yeah. So I think one of the, I guess, final things that we'll say just in the remaining time that we have, or at least that I'll say, I don't know if Father Patrick can get a last word in too. And this goes back to something we already talked about in as much as it's throughout the film, but also it's the way by which I think the film kind of ends, is that it's not reductionist even in its ending. There's not a sort of clear kind of like hero wins the day reality to the ending even. And that, what's portrayed is or it's an attempted portrayal of humanity and of real life, that life isn't easy. And you see this throughout the relationship between the two throughout the movie. Life isn't satisfying often. There aren't always answers to family issues, identity issues, suffering issues. This is part of the life that we enter into, part of the fallen world that we enter into. And I think that Groningen, Carell, Chalamet, the rest of the cast do an excellent job portraying that, not in a way that's kind of forced or phony, but in a way that's sort of eminently kind of relatable, even in the extreme setting that David and Nick find themselves. So that's my last thought. Do you have a last thought on the film, Father Patrick?
I think that's right. I just want to say that, a final motif that you see, and this is kind of how the film ends, is over and over again, you see this father hugging his son, right? Mm-hmm. This embrace, this affection. And you see that through all of the difficulty, all the struggles. And one of the things that absolutely makes it possible for Nick to keep going, however complicated and broken it is that relationship with his father. And so to see the film, close on this one last embrace without giving too much of it away is really powerful, because it answers in its own way one of those cures for that fundamental alienation, that isolation, which is genuine, deep and fulfilling human relationship.
Well, there you have it. Our first go at a movie. Father Patrick, Father Jacob Bertrand. Here we are. So if you're looking for a good movie to watch, we recommend it. Beautiful Boy, Steve Carell.
You can cry on a train, or tear up on an airplane. The idea of Father Jacob Bertrand crying on the airplane is sort of funny, because I
didn't cry on the airplane, but no,
I went on the train. Yeah, it was really embarrassing.
Yeah. So, well, good. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, share it with somebody who you think might benefit from tuning in too. Thank you so much for your continued support, especially our Patreon supporters, and helping to continue to bring the podcast along and spread the gospel through our conversations here. Until next time, know of our prayers for you, and please pray for us too. God bless.
Thanks for listening to Godsplaining, a work of the Dominican friars of the province of St. Joseph. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Leave a review on your podcast app, and visit us at godsplaining.org.